Everyone warned Connor about the vampire in Section 7, but when he saw her sitting alone in the dark hugging herself, he did what no one had done in 3 years. He knocked on her window and offered her coffee. Connor Blake stood outside Cell 7 of Sector B, his eyes fixed on a figure within that was barely visible through the thick glass. He could just make out Seraphine Knoxville's silhouette. Her pale skin glowed faintly like moonlight against the shadows inside. Despite all warnings and rumors circulating about her being dangerous, something deep in Connor pulled him forward. "Hey," he called softly to catch her attention. She looked up suddenly at his voice, those crimson eyes wide with surprise before narrowing into suspicion. He held out a thermos of steaming coffee, trying not to let the warmth from the cup show too much hope. "I brought you some coffee," Connor said calmly, though internally there was an anxious flutter. "I know it's cold now," but before he could finish his sentence, she flinched away and pressed her back against the far wall of her cell, as if to protect herself from him. Her hands moved up to cover the sides of her head, fingers trembling slightly. Stay away," Seraphine whispered almost inaudibly through clenched teeth. The desperation in that voice cut straight into Connor's heart, like an old knife he had forgotten about for years. It stung with familiar sadness and loneliness. Connor took a step back, but held the thermos firmly, determined to not let her go unnoticed or unacknowledged again. "No one has talked to you?" His question was more of a statement than anything else. Seraphine's eyes flickered up at him once more before sliding away in defeat and shame. She shook her head slowly, as if each movement cost her too much effort and courage just now. Connor sighed, knowing all the risks, but not caring enough about his own safety to back down from this moment of truth. "I'm Connor," he introduced himself hesitantly yet firmly. "Nice meeting you, Seraphine." He held out a spare cup, as if offering it was going to solve some deep cosmic imbalance between them, hoping she wouldn't let him stay too long, because all at once his heart started pounding hard against his chest. Was this affecting him so much? Seraphine's eyes darted around the room and back towards Connor several times before finally landing on the offered cup. It took her a moment to reach out slowly through the barrier between them, just enough for him to slide it inside, and then quickly step back. "Thank you," she murmured softly, as if not wanting anyone else ever hear such words again. Connor nodded encouragingly, but kept his distance, already turning away before things could get too risky or complicated. As he continued with his rounds, each step felt lighter than the last, even though something inside him still ached for more connection where there were none to be found easily. But as he walked down another corridor of Section B area everyone avoided because of its dangerous resident, couldn't help but feel like this was just the beginning of an unexpected adventure. The rest of his rounds seemed less routine, perhaps because now there was someone new in his mind who deserved more than silence and fear from all around her. It would take time to break down walls built out of fear and misunderstanding. Connor knew that much with clarity, as clear as morning dew on a forgotten blade. But he also understood how sometimes the simplest gestures can shift entire worlds if given enough chance. Patience, trust, 3 things no one had yet extended towards Seraphine Knoxville. And so, while others still whispered about danger and avoided Section 7 like it was plague-stricken ground rather than a place holding someone trapped in darkness, Connor's simple act of kindness would be the first step toward change. It might seem small now, but every journey starts with one step forward, and he had just taken his. Seraphine watched as Connor disappeared from sight around the corner, her hand still lightly touching where she'd felt his presence through the glass moments ago. The coffee sat unopened in front of her on a makeshift wooden table beside an old lamp powered by ambient energy Its warmth radiated across the cold metal floor and into her heart like rays piercing through storm clouds. Her eyes remained fixed down at the thermos long after Connor was gone, seeing more than just another cup, but rather a symbol of something rare in these days: hope. A human who dared to see past fear and offer kindness instead of condemnation had appeared right outside her door. She couldn't stop herself from smiling softly, an expression so foreign it felt alien on her face, as she gently picked up the thermos with trembling fingers before placing its contents inside a small pot next to another makeshift contraption designed for heating liquids. She needed warmth tonight more than ever, not just physically, but emotionally too. And though Connor was gone now, his kindness lingered behind like afterglow from stars. As Seraphine slowly unwrapped her gloves and set them aside carefully, out of habit rather than need years of isolation had made these gestures automatic, a flicker of hope began to shine through the darkness around her. It started small but grew stronger with each breath, each heartbeat echoing down corridors that once seemed utterly desolate. Tonight was different, not just because someone finally acknowledged her existence, but because it offered a chance for change. Change meant new possibilities, and perhaps even love, if one dared reach out and grasp them firmly, against all odds. As dawn approached and Connor prepared to leave after his shift, he paused near Sector B's main exit, looking back towards the darkened Section 7. He felt like he was leaving behind more than just another night on duty. There was a connection now that couldn't be ignored no matter how much it scared him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if Seraphine would ever accept his silent offer of friendship, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over yet. The first step had been taken towards breaking down barriers and finding something beyond fear in the most unexpected place imaginable. Darkened sector holding a creature others called dangerous, and that alone made everything worthwhile. End chapter 1. The night was young when Connor Blake arrived at Sector B, his usual route leading him straight to Section 7, where everyone shunned their duties and kept a safe distance from danger. Today, as he approached Seraphine Knoxville's cell for the first time since taking on this shift, there was an unspoken determination in his step. He carried with him 2 thermoses of hot coffee. The warm brew had become both comfort and weapon against the coldness that seeped into these late hours. 1 cup he set down outside Seraphine's reinforced glass cell, its steam curling upwards towards her face as though trying to bridge their worlds momentarily. The other remained by his side. Connor's hand hesitated for a moment before reaching out again to press the intercom button on the wall beside him. His voice was steady yet soft, carrying hints of curiosity mixed with respect. "Hey there, it's Connor." Through static and silence, he could almost imagine her response in his mind, ghostly echo of past greetings from other guards who had come before, only to leave without ever truly communicating beyond the surface fears. "Are you here to tell me something important?" Seraphine's voice crackled back through the speakers finally. It was a fragile whisper, hoarse and unused, as if she hadn't spoken in days or weeks rather than months. Connor smiled slightly at her question, not entirely sure himself why he had come, except that it felt necessary somehow. "No," he said honestly, his tone gentle but firm. "In just here to chat maybe?" She hesitated for a moment longer before replying again with an almost reluctant curiosity. "Why?" Her voice sounded like tiny shards of ice melting together in the warmth of conversation. "Because," Connor answered simply, after another pause, filled solely by the sound of their breathing, "everyone deserves someone who listens." There was no immediate response from Seraphine at first. Instead, there followed a long silence that stretched out until even the hums and beeps around them seemed to hold their breath. Finally, through static once more came her soft voice again. No one does. Her words were like whispers of truth in a void, where reality hung by threads too thin for others to perceive. Connor's heart softened at her admission, but he kept his reply light and encouraging. "Well," he said with genuine warmth lacing every word, "here I am." The air seemed to thicken between them as Connor took another sip from the thermos beside him, holding it out towards her cell like an offering across invisible boundaries. "Have some coffee," he suggested. Seraphine's eyes drifted down toward where she knew the cup must be stationed outside her window. Warmth in a universe of cold isolation. Yet still those deep crimson orbs remained cautious, reflecting fears older and deeper than any single night's shift could conquer overnight. "I can't take this," Seraphine finally spoke up after another few moments' contemplation, voice trembling ever so slightly now. "What if something happens?" Connor chuckled softly, trying to ease her concerns without dismissiveness. "I won't let anything happen," he reassured gently. "It's just coffee." After a moment of deliberating internally with herself about such an offer that had surely never before been made in this sector, she nodded hesitantly and reached out as far as she dared through the small opening designed for food passage, carefully picking up both thermos and cup with gloved hands. Her fingers trembled slightly against the metal, but she managed to handle them without incident. "Thank you," Seraphine murmured quietly once more into the intercom. See, before moving away from her side of things towards a corner where she set everything down amidst other makeshift arrangements for living spaces within her confines. Connor watched silently as she moved, his heart pulling at seeing such raw vulnerability despite knowing better than to intrude further physically. "You're welcome," he replied softly back through the speaker system, then turned away from the glass momentarily when she retreated into herself again, leaving him alone, but not entirely abandoned in this night's darkness. "Why do you keep coming here?" Seraphine asked suddenly, after a stretch of time had passed since their initial exchange. Her voice echoed with confusion and slight desperation now, as if trying to understand why someone would risk so much just for idle conversation, or maybe something deeper beneath that veneer of safety and avoidance established by everyone else around her. Connor's heart gave another tug at the raw emotion threaded through her question, but he replied calmly, "Because you're here. Because somewhere in all this place needs someone to listen, even if it feels like no one listens back." Silence followed his words, thick enough to cut with a knife except for the sounds of their breathing and distant hums filtering into their space over speakers designed primarily as tools rather than conduits for human connection. Seraphine's shoulders visibly sagged through the glass where she stood alone, now facing him again after her movements earlier in search of solace or distraction. "I don't understand," she confessed quietly, almost to herself, more so even though he could hear it clearly over intercom system channels designed merely as means for exchange rather than genuine human interaction. Connor's gaze softened further, as if seeing through the barriers beyond mere glass and technical limitations standing between them tonight. "Neither do I," he admitted truthfully, then added softly, "but sometimes understanding isn't about finding answers so much as it is just being there." A momentary pause followed his words before Seraphine's voice cracked again with unshed tears. "This time you seem different from others." Connor felt a surge of warmth in his chest upon hearing such a simple yet profound compliment. "Maybe," he shrugged through the speakers, keeping everything light despite how deeply meaningful her acknowledgement was to him personally. Seraphine's reply came then, softer still, as if afraid She might break something fragile within even this thin veneer they'd built together tonight. You seem less scared. Everyone has their reasons, Connor answered gently before pausing for a moment more. Then he continued softly, almost under his breath, almost only to himself, but loud enough that intercom system picked up and relayed back into her side of things. And sometimes those same fears can turn into something else entirely with just one small step. Another long silence followed after that profound exchange between them both in physical reality beyond their barriers, as well spiritually, amidst walls built by fear, misunderstanding, and isolation over years of existence rather than days or weeks. Then suddenly Seraphine's voice broke through once more, but this time carried less strain, perhaps even a touch of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly, again before turning away finally towards the makeshift table had seen earlier, beside her bed area, where she had placed thermos alongside other necessities for survival within confines far beyond what any normal person might endure. Connor nodded silently to himself as watched through glass barrier or separating them still tonight didn't need her seeing him see that response. Instead, he simply turned away from her, now also moving towards end of his shift and back into more familiar territory, around Sector B's main corridors, free from shadows cast by someone others called dangerous, but whom Connor saw differently. As dawn approached, signaling nearing time to leave Section 7 behind for another day or night ahead, whatever that might bring, Connor paused briefly near exit points, looking once again over shoulders towards darkened area he had just left behind. It wasn't entirely certain what tomorrow would hold either way, though connection now felt palpable, even amidst barriers standing between them. Seraphine remained sitting quietly inside her cell then as Connor prepared to leave, a glass separating worlds, yet offering glimmers of hope through unspoken actions and words carried across intercom lines designed primarily for safety rather than genuine human connections. And it was that last glimpse she offered him before fully retreating back into darkness, alone once more, eyes reflecting duality within even her solitude, a mirror held up, not just to shadows, but potential light shining through cracks in every barrier built by fear. This ended Connor's chapter, ending exactly where the plot dictated while setting stage for future possibilities beyond current limitations. Connor Blake approached Section 7 for his shift, his steps steady and determined despite the heavy silence that seemed to settle over the area each night. He carried not only his thermos of coffee, but also an extra cup, one filled with a mixture of herbal tea, which he knew would be soothing. As Connor entered Sector 7's main control room, the air felt charged, almost electric. The station's automated voice greeted him as usual. "Good evening, Connor Blake." Connor nodded to himself, taking in his surroundings before setting off on his rounds. He walked past dimly lit corridors, pausing briefly outside Seraphine Knoxville's cell. "Evening, Seraphine," he said into the intercom speaker beside her door. Silence followed for a moment until Seraphine's voice whispered back, "Good evening." Connor took another step closer to the transparent barrier that separated them. He held out his thermos, an extra cup, tapping gently on the glass with his knuckles. "Here's your tea," he said softly through the intercom. A faint glow from inside her cell indicated she had taken it into hand. Seraphine's voice trembled slightly as she replied, "Thank you," again. Connor nodded to himself and moved away, continuing his patrol but always aware of Section 7 and its mysterious inhabitant. His rounds were meticulous. He never missed a spot or an opportunity to make eye contact with the other staff who worked on night shifts, offering them cups from his thermos as well. The station was quieter tonight than usual, perhaps because it was almost dawn already, marking one of Connor's final hours in Section 7 for this week. His heart felt heavier, knowing their time together would soon be cut short again until the following day. Despite that weight, he couldn't help but feel a sense of connection forming between them. When Connor returned to Seraphine's cell towards the end of his shift, she was sitting near her makeshift table, the place where they had started their tentative conversations over intercoms and cups of tea coffee. The room felt more intimate tonight. There was less distance in her voice when he approached again. "Connor," she greeted softly, as if sensing him even before seeing the reflection of his figure outside her cell. Her pause made Connor's heart rate quicken with anticipation, wondering what she might say or ask next after their previous exchanges had been so meaningful and profound for both of them. "Do you have a moment?" Seraphine continued hesitantly through the intercom speaker system. Connor nodded to himself, even though she couldn't see him. "Of course," he replied warmly, into her side of things, setting down his thermos on a nearby surface briefly before turning back towards her cell's transparent barrier once more with purposeful steps. Seraphine's voice became softer still, as if hesitant about what words would come next. "There is something I need to tell you." Connor steeled himself for whatever she was going to say. His hand rested on the intercom speaker, his heart pounding in rhythm with her every breath he could hear through static. "Seraphine," he began gently but firmly, "you can trust me if anyone here." A pause followed before Seraphine's voice cracked again, but this time it carried a different weight, a desperate honesty. "3 years ago, I made a terrible mistake." Connor's grip tightened on the intercom as she continued. "I was new to being an ambassador for my people, representing us in peace talks with other galactic factions. And then, one of those diplomats—" Her voice broke into sobs then, and Connor could feel his chest tighten painfully for her. "Please," he urged softly through the speaker system, wanting only to soothe, but knowing she needed this release regardless how difficult it was both for them now. "It happened so fast, my condition got away from me. I fed without realizing until—" She sobbed harder then, unable to say anything else over her own tears. Connor waited patiently for her words, even when his chest ached with every breath of silence, and each sob she let out through the intercom system. "And they found me there," Seraphine continued finally between gasps and sobs, as if forcing herself back into control despite pain of remembering. "Drained completely dry, an empty shell." Connor nodded to himself again, his hand still tight on speaker system's surface, even though she couldn't see it through glass barrier separating them now. "You were exiled here," he said softly, but understandingly, without judgment in tone or posture. Seraphine's voice trembled further, as if seeking confirmation of what Connor already understood. "Yes, tell me more," he encouraged gently, knowing the importance of letting her tell her story fully, no matter how painful it might be to recount. Another pause followed his words before Seraphine's voice cracked again, but now with unshed tears this time. "I finally understand why everyone is afraid. I know what happened and who's responsible for keeping me here." Connor felt a surge of warmth in his chest upon hearing such profound vulnerability breaking through her usual reserve, something rare indeed from someone as isolated within their own shadows. "Maybe," Connor shrugged through the speakers, trying to keep everything light despite how deeply meaningful her acknowledgement was personally. "Everyone has reasons though. Doesn't matter if it's fear or misunderstanding." Seraphine listened intently for a moment, then replied softer, still almost afraid she might break something fragile in even this thin veneer they'd built together tonight. "You seem different from others." Connor nodded silently to himself, acknowledging what he had perhaps longed to hear all along, but never expected anyone here would speak aloud. And sometimes those same fears can turn into something entirely else with just one small step. He mused softly before continuing, almost under his breath, yet loud enough for intercom system picked up and relayed back inside Seraphine's side of things, where it echoed warmly despite physical distances standing between them both now. Another long silence followed after that profound exchange, both in reality beyond barriers as well spiritually, amidst walls built by fear, misunderstanding over years rather than days or weeks alone. Then suddenly Seraphine's voice broke through once more, but this time carried less strain, perhaps even a touch of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly, again before turning away finally towards makeshift table had seen earlier, beside her bed area, where thermos alongside other necessities for survival within confines far beyond what normal person might endure. Connor nodded silently, as watched through glass barrier, or separating them still tonight, didn't need her seeing him see the response, instead moving toward end of his shift and back into more familiar territory, around Sector B's main corridors free from shadows cast by someone others called dangerous, but whom Connor saw differently now after this chance at truth sharing. As dawn approached, signaling nearing time to leave Section 7 behind for another day or night ahead, whatever might come next, Connor paused briefly near exit points, looking once again over shoulders towards darkened area he had just left behind. It wasn't entirely certain what tomorrow would hold either way, but connection now felt palpable, even amidst barriers standing between them. Seraphine remained sitting quietly inside her cell then as Connor prepared to leave it, glass separating worlds, yet offering glimmers of hope through unspoken actions and words carried across intercom lines designed primarily for safety rather than genuine human connections. And it was that last glimpse she offered him before fully retreating back into darkness alone once more, eyes reflecting duality within even her solitude, a mirror held up, not just to shadows, but potential light shining through cracks in every barrier built by fear. "Connor," Seraphine's voice called out quietly, breaking the silence again as he was about to leave. She hesitated for a moment before continuing, I need you to see something." He turned back immediately, heart pounding with anticipation and concern. "What is it?" he asked through the intercom. Seraphine's voice steadied slightly, though there was still an undercurrent of fear in her tone as she replied, "There's a reason why everyone keeps their distance from me." Connor nodded silently before replying reassuringly, "You can show me." He approached the glass barrier once more. Seraphine moved to stand by one corner, where she could see him clearly through the transparent wall that kept them apart. "Please, look." Her voice was barely audible, but clear in its urgency now as Connor stepped closer again, until he felt as though he were standing right next to her cell despite physical barriers separating their worlds so starkly. Seraphine held out her hands, those same pale, luminescent ones, with dark circles under eyes from years, without proper feeding or rest. She brought them up through the glass carefully, fingers trembling slightly, but determined nonetheless. "These have killed," she said quietly yet firmly, into speaker system, which relayed back to Connor, standing just beyond touch range, still outside her cell's transparent barriers. Connor stared at her hands in silence for a long moment before nodding slowly and deeply, understanding now what it was that made others shudder away from Seraphine Knoxville. "You can't control your pulses," he stated calmly, but with empathy clear in his voice through intercom system relaying back towards her. Seraphine's eyes filled with tears again at this acknowledgement, both of recognition and perhaps relief, She wasn't alone anymore, carrying such burden forward into darkness now awaiting dawn outside Section 7 main corridors. "One touch," she whispered softly, almost to herself, more than him, but intercom picked up nonetheless, "and I could drain you completely." Connor took a deep breath before responding gentle. "Why?" Yet firmly once again. "But do you want to hurt people?" Seraphine looked horrified at his question, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief, as if the very idea was impossible for her mind even to entertain, let alone voice aloud. "Never," she whispered with absolute conviction, tears brimming over now despite all attempts otherwise to control herself before bursting fully into sobs again. Connor nodded silently through intercom system, but this time more firmly setting his resolve in stone regarding what he knew deep down within him already after recent exchanges. "Then you are not a monster," he stated calmly yet with authority. "You are someone with medical condition who needs help, not cage." Seraphine's sobs quieted slowly as Connor's words sunk into her soul. She had long held herself responsible for crimes beyond control over so many years now, amidst isolation and misunderstanding. "Thank you," Seraphine whispered again softly through intercom system, which carried his voice back towards her now broken but hopeful tone in its wake instead of despair. "I didn't know." Connor nodded once more to himself, even though she couldn't see him, and neither did anyone else until tonight. He paused, taking another deep breath, before continuing quietly yet deliberately through intercom system, relaying his message back towards her cells, transparent barriers separating them still now despite shared moment of truth and understanding they had found together finally. Seraphine listened intently for a moment, then sighed softly, as if relieved somehow by this new perspective Connor was offering amidst years of fear, isolation built around who she thought herself to be, but also perhaps what others made her believe without ever truly knowing. "Good night," Seraphine whispered finally through intercom system once more towards dawn approaching outside Section 7 main corridors now marking end for both their shifts momentarily yet setting stage further possibilities beyond current limitations standing between them still despite barriers built by fear, misunderstanding, or even physical separation alone no longer enough to keep connection from forming. Connor nodded silently to himself as watched through glass barrier her separating him from Seraphine's cell once more. His chest felt lighter now knowing they had shared something profoundly meaningful despite physical distance remaining so starkly clear between them still yet somehow lessened by recent exchanges. He turned away finally towards end of his shift, moving back into familiar territory around Sector BS, main corridors free from shadows cast only by those others might call dangerous or even monsters, but whom Connor saw differently now after chance at truth sharing they had found together amidst night's final hours before dawn. As dawn broke outside Section 7, Connor felt a sense of connection lingering long after his shift ended for another day ahead. He walked away from the sector, leaving behind not just an isolated alien woman, but someone who was beginning to see herself differently because of their brief interactions and mutual understanding despite barriers that seemed insurmountable. 3. Velnectari, Velnectari, Velnectari. The dawn light began to filter into 7th sector, casting long shadows across the corridor as Connor Blake concluded his nightly rounds. He had one last stop before he could finally leave for home, Seraphine's cell. He approached her transparent enclosure and peered inside through the intercom. "Good morning," he said softly. For a moment, no response came. Then, faintly from within, she replied, "Morning," again. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, laced with sadness and resignation. Connor's heart clenched at her tone. He had come to care for Seraphine despite the warnings not to get too close. She deserved someone who could see past fear into understanding. If only he could convince everyone else of that truth as well. Tonight's patrol was unusually quiet. It felt like a prelude to something significant yet unknown. As dawn approached and his shift ended, Connor returned one last time to 7th Sector with a sense of purpose brewing inside him. Seraphine, he leaned closer to the glass wall. Do you have some minutes before I go? Yes, she whispered back after a long pause. There is something. Connor waited patiently until her voice regained strength enough for them both to hear clearly over the intercom system. I've thought about it. The isolation, my condition. Seraphine's words seemed weighed down by years of regret and sorrow. Her eyes met his through the glass, an urgent plea lingering in their crimson depths. I don't want to die like this anymore. Then tell me how we can change that, Connor said firmly but gently. The look on her face was one of desperation mixed with fear. She needed help desperately, but feared it would only bring more pain and loss into her life. I need someone who understands. Seraphine's voice broke, trailing off in a sob. Connor, he stepped closer to the glass wall without hesitation now. You know you can trust me. She nodded slightly through tears, then composed herself somewhat. There is something I've been meaning to show you. Through her isolation window, she showed him her hands. Gloves pulled off, revealing pale, luminescent skin and long, slender fingers. They trembled ever so lightly under his gaze. I need touch, Seraphine admitted through trembling lips, voice shaking as much from the admission of vulnerability as it was by years of suppression. Without contact, my people will wither away eventually. Connor studied her hands closely for a moment before he spoke again. There must be other ways to help you. Not easily enough, she said wearily, shoulders slumped in defeat. In that instant, Connor made up his mind. He would not let another soul suffer alone or die from what society deemed dangerous merely because they were different and misunderstood. Today was the day things had to change for Seraphine Knoxvilleth. Seraphine, he said into the intercom system forcefully yet kindly. At once, I am going to override your cell's lock. She started slightly in surprise, eyes widening as if afraid of what would happen next. No, please don't come inside. I have to do this, Connor replied calmly, but with determination. He walked over and pressed the button that allowed him physical access into 7th Sector. The door hummed open mechanically before them both. It was a rare occurrence given the strict protocol against unauthorized entry here. But Connor had seen enough of her suffering, couldn't stand by any longer waiting for something to happen on its own accord when he could take action himself right now instead. He stepped inside cautiously, his hands outstretched, but not threateningly so, toward Seraphine, who recoiled slightly from him, as if expecting some kind of attack or betrayal. Seraphine, Connor said soothingly, again, and moved slowly towards her across the room, where she stood pressed against one wall trying to retreat further back into herself away from possible danger. She screamed, "Get out! You will be hurt badly here." Tears streamed down her face now. The situation clearly terrified her far more than any potential physical harm might do so. Why are you putting yourself at risk like that? Because, Connor said firmly, as he kept advancing on her despite the obvious fear in every line of her posture and tone, you deserve someone who cares enough to try. Seraphine backed herself up into a corner, now shaking from head to toe, visibly trembling under pressure which seemed almost physically painful for her. Connor, don't! You could die, she gasped out. And if I don't? He asked softly, but with unmistakable steel in his voice, holding the edges of Seraphine's hooded jacket firmly, as though trying to reach through it and hold on to some tangible hope instead of despair. She sobbed quietly, under her breath, unable fully form coherent words anymore. "You can't help me. I'm not going to let you go down without a fight," Connor said softly, his voice full of both determination and concern. Through all this, he never lost sight of the fact that she needed him now more than anything else possibly could. He took another step forward, until finally their bodies were almost touching, despite her still being partially behind glass separating them due to safety protocols, which meant it was only possible for Connor's hand reaching through with no actual skin-to-skin contact. It was enough, though his touch comforted, even if she felt too scared or guilty to accept more. "Please, take what you need," he urged gently, but firmly, now pressing the tips of her gloved fingers ever so slightly back towards himself. Her eyes met his, and tears poured down her face, unabated, no longer able to hide them anymore. "Connor," she whispered brokenly, unable yet unwilling to deny him further, even if she knew it might mean risking everything. He held on to her hand tightly, still pressing gently, but firmly, guiding Seraphine's fingers towards removing the glove from around one trembling palm. For a moment, both of them hesitated, staring into each other's eyes, with unspoken promises and fears mingling together in that single glance shared between strangers who had become something more overnight. And then slowly, almost reverently, Seraphine removed her protective barrier away, leaving behind vulnerable skin exposed to whatever fate might have waiting on the outside world. Connor took a deep breath, feeling his own heart rate spike wildly as he finally touched Seraphine's hand properly, for real, this time, without any interference or protection anymore between them. Their hands met in tentative but hopeful contact. Connor's grip was steady and warm against her cold skin. She shivered slightly under the sensation of actual human flesh touching hers again after so long isolated away from everyone else. Fear flickered across her expression quickly, though replaced by an intense sense of connection finally made that years had denied both of them. "Connor," she whispered again, voice catching in throat thick with tears and conflicting emotions. I know it's scary," he said softly, but firmly, still holding on to her hand tightly enough to convey his unspoken promise not to let go anytime soon, regardless if either could admit those words aloud yet or not just now. In that moment, they both knew something significant had changed, even as their hands remained locked together tentatively. A fragile thread connecting two souls who understood all too well about being cast out by society, but also finding unexpected solace in unlikely places when others feared to approach because of what made them different, rather than seeing beyond those differences into shared humanity. Connor's heart raced under the weight of newly found responsibility and hope for Seraphine, while her own fears slowly began easing away with each second their hands remained connected. The touch was more profound than either had dared imagine or hoped could ever happen again between beings so fundamentally misunderstood by everyone else around them, who only saw danger instead seeing potential for understanding. This moment represented a leap of faith and trust far beyond anything they'd previously known existed within themselves, let alone what others perceived as possible anymore in Seventh Sector. Yet here it was happening, right before their very eyes, two hearts beating out of sync, but finding rhythm together against all odds placed upon them, because someone decided to see past fear into compassion instead. The rest is yet unwritten. Both characters continue on an uncertain path forward filled with challenges ahead neither could fully foresee now, even as they took that first step towards redefining what it meant truly mean for alien vampires and humans alike to coexist peacefully. The night was as silent as it always had been at Seventh Sector. But this time, there was a difference in Connor's step as he made his rounds. For 3 years, no one had ventured into Section 7 without donning full hazmat suits and masks. Yet now, every so often, Connor would stop to glance over the glass barrier where Seraphine sat alone and broken-hearted. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt like a night for change, a night when he might finally be brave enough not just to look, but to reach out again, despite the risks lingering in everyone's minds about what lay beyond that impenetrable wall of fear. As Connor reached Section 7, his heart was already racing faster than usual under the weight of newly found responsibility and hope. Seraphine had been staring at him through her room's window as he approached. Their eyes met across the distance separating them in a silent promise neither dared voice aloud just yet due to overwhelming fear mingled with anticipation. "Connor," she whispered, more forcefully this time than when they first broke the ice of awkwardness between each other's gazes. I need something from you." For once it wasn't about coffee or pleasantries, but a deeper connection. Both felt it acutely, even if words couldn't fully articulate what was being said beyond just looking at one another. "What do you need, Seraphine?" he asked gently, standing closer to the barrier dividing them physically without actually touching anything that might break under pressure from his presence alone. "Tell me." I haven't fed in so long," she admitted quietly, voice breaking slightly, as if admitting such a thing was an open invitation for judgment and rejection rather than understanding or support, which is precisely why she chose to trust Connor with this burden today of all nights. Feeling her hesitation, he stepped closer still until his chest nearly pressed against the glass barrier meant to keep them apart. "I'm here," he said firmly but reassuringly. His hand moved towards hers through the divider and wrapped around its edge warmly in an attempt to convey solidarity despite everything that kept them from being close. "Let me help you." He didn't know what else to say, so those simple words were all he could offer right now. Seraphine looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear dancing within her crimson eyes. Are you sure?" Connor nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I am." She took another deep breath and moved closer herself until she was practically leaning against the glass where his hand remained, as if trying to bridge that gap between them somehow, even when no physical connection could exist yet. With a sudden rush of determination, Connor pulled back slightly from touching her through barriers once more, but instead reached into his pocket for something else entirely. "Wait here," he instructed softly before turning away momentarily towards an emergency storage locker near the edge of Section 7 where medical supplies were kept. Minutes later, armed with a small box containing specialized gloves designed to allow controlled energy transfer without harm for those who might be compatible enough to support each other safely through such fragile means as their kind required. Sometimes Connor returned feeling oddly prepared, yet still uncertain about what was about to happen next between them. He couldn't stop himself from being both anxious and hopeful at the same time. "Here," he said, offering her a pair of these gloves that would serve as an intermediary for allowing some form of interaction without risking lethal consequences due to Seraphine's natural feeding needs upon those who weren't prepared or compatible enough biologically on their end. "These should help us manage things properly." Relief and gratitude shone briefly in Seraphine's eyes before she accepted the gloves with trembling fingers, her heart racing almost as fast, if not faster than Connor's own, under this newfound hope for connection despite all odds standing against it. "Thank you," was all she could muster at first while slipping them over her hands carefully. enough to avoid causing further damage accidentally through simple touch. Then came another moment of hesitation before stepping closer once more. Now they were finally in physical proximity, without the barrier between their spaces acting as a constant reminder that something so dangerous existed and should be avoided. "Now, take my hand," Connor urged softly yet firmly, enough not to startle her into pulling away again. They both knew what this moment represented, even if neither could fully explain it just yet, beyond knowing deep down inside themselves how desperately needed such simple contact was after being deprived of human touch for far too long now. Seraphine moved tentatively, reaching out and grasping Connor's hand with hers through the glove. Still no actual skin contact, but still closer than ever before in years. The sense of connection between them felt palpable, even as their fingers interlaced gently over protective barriers, again momentarily reminding both about remaining careful until further notice, despite longing for so much more. "Feel it?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper against the sterile silence echoing around them within Section 7's corridors. "This is what I've been wanting to do since day one." She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Connor's as she felt him through the glove. A warmth unlike anything Seraphine had experienced in an eternity when everyone else thought of her only with fear and hatred rather than seeing beyond superficial appearance into shared struggles behind closed doors where no light dared shine too brightly due to risk involved. "Feeling you, she paused briefly before continuing, voice catching slightly, but pushing through nonetheless for clarity's sake, even if it hurt momentarily. "I feel something else." Connor nodded understandingly. He knew what she meant without needing words beyond a silent exchange of glances, and the way their hands remained locked together tentatively. "We can do this," he reassured her again, squeezing gently, but carefully so as not to risk accidental injury. Due caution advised regarding such delicate processes between them. "Just let go." Carefully, they began removing protective layers slowly, one layer at a time, until finally just one bare hand was left exposed between theirs, while maintaining constant eye contact filled with promises and fears mingling together in that single glance shared between strangers who had become something more overnight. "Connor," she whispered again, voice catching thickly, now full of conflicting emotions from both fear about what might happen if this failed to hope for a chance at redemption through simple touch after so long isolated away from everyone else. I know it's scary," he said softly, but firmly, still holding onto her hand tightly, enough convey his unspoken promise not let go anytime soon, regardless whether either could admit those words aloud yet or just now standing here amidst uncertainty and potential danger. In that moment both knew something significant had changed, even as their hands remained connected tentatively. A fragile thread connecting two souls who understood all too well about being cast out by society, but also finding unexpected solace in unlikely places when others feared to approach because of what made them different, rather than seeing beyond those differences into shared humanity. With a final deep breath, Seraphine removed her protective barrier away, leaving behind vulnerable skin exposed for the first time in over 1,000 days. Fear flickered across her expression quickly, though soon replaced by an intense sense of connection finally found that years had denied both of them until now. Under Connor's support and understanding rather than condemnation or fear. Connor took another deep breath, feeling his own heart rate spike wildly as he finally touched Seraphine's hand properly, for real, this time without any interference whatsoever between them. Their hands met in tentative but hopeful contact. Connor's grip was steady and warm against her cold skin, while Seraphine shivered slightly under the sensation of actual human flesh touching hers again after so long isolated away from everyone else. For a moment, everything paused, as if holding its breath, waiting for some sort of reaction that might confirm whether this dangerous experiment would prove beneficial or catastrophic instead. Then slowly, almost reverently, Seraphine's eyes softened, and she smiled faintly, even through the haze of anxiety still lingering around their encounter today. This was a step forward towards healing rather than continued isolation caused by fear alone. Suddenly, they both felt something shift, a strange energy coursing between them that neither had expected nor understood fully just yet regarding implications this connection might hold moving forward beyond immediate physical sensation into deeper bonds, perhaps forming naturally, out of necessity and mutual understanding against all odds placed upon them, because someone decided to see past fear, instead seeing potential for genuine compassion amidst otherwise insurmountable barriers standing tall like monoliths between two worlds normally kept separate due misunderstanding alone. Seraphine's pulse quickened noticeably as she realized something profound was happening here tonight beyond simple touch or even mutual survival needs met momentarily through carefully controlled interactions. This wasn't just about feeding anymore. It felt more akin to forming some sort of symbiotic bond that might sustain both their energies moving forward rather than draining one another destructively like past encounters had inevitably resulted into. "Connor," she gasped softly, her voice trembling slightly under sheer surprise and relief washing over her suddenly, as she sensed something shifting fundamentally within herself due to this unexpected yet promising interaction tonight. "This feels different." He nodded slowly, his own heart racing now, fully understanding what was occurring between them, even if neither could articulate the science or magic behind such phenomena just yet regarding implications for future interactions based off established compatibility beyond initial survival needs met momentarily. "Tell me how," he urged softly, but firmly, knowing instinctively that pushing further would require careful guidance rather than reckless abandonment of caution necessary still amidst uncertainties lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now that this leap had been taken together willingly despite everything standing against it due societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone. With a sudden rush, Seraphine's body began responding to Connor's energy in ways neither fully anticipated just yet regarding implications for forming sustainable bonds beyond immediate needs met through controlled interactions. It felt like an electric current running between them, warmth radiating outward from where their hands remained linked still despite everything that had kept them apart before tonight. For the first time since her exile, Seraphine's eyes lit up with a new light, flicker of hope long extinguished by fear and isolation beginning to rekindle again under Connor's steady hand, providing support even amidst uncertainties lingering around potential risks involved moving forward now. She gasped softly as sensations she hadn't felt in years began rushing back into her system like an awakening after prolonged hibernation. "Connor," she whispered again, voice trembling slightly, but filled with renewed purpose rather than just fear or hesitation, due this moment breaking chains of isolation binding them together through shared humanity, despite superficial differences threatening to tear apart trust formed amidst uncertainties lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. I feel it. She paused briefly before continuing, voice catching thickly again, even under sheer surprise and relief washing over her suddenly, as she sensed something shifting fundamentally within herself due this unexpected yet promising interaction tonight. We're connected. Connor nodded slowly, in understanding he knew what she meant without needing words, beyond a silent exchange of glances confirming mutual acceptance. Despite everything that had kept them apart before tonight, amidst uncertainties lingering around potential risks involved moving forward now. We are, he agreed softly, squeezing her hand, gently but carefully, to convey his support even amidst uncertainties still present regarding implications for forming sustainable bonds based off established compatibility, rather than just immediate our vital needs met momentarily through controlled interactions. As their energies synced, in a way neither fully understood, yet regarding implications beyond initial physical sensations experienced moving forward now that this leap had been taken together willingly despite everything standing against it due societal fears, perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone. Both of them collapsed to the ground amidst mutual support provided by each other's touch, finally breaking chains of isolation binding them apart through shared humanity. Seraphine was no longer weak and vulnerable. Her eyes glowed brightly as she stood up shakily, but steadily, finally strong once more due this unexpected yet promising interaction tonight that had broken barriers standing tall between two worlds normally kept separate by fear alone rather than genuine understanding or compassion. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. Connor, she said softly, her voice filled with renewed determination as well as tears of relief. I can touch you. He looked at her in amazement, his own eyes glistening slightly under the realization that they had truly done something incredible tonight beyond just mutual survival needs met momentarily through controlled interactions amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. Seraphine, he replied softly but firmly, nodding understandingly, even as both of them felt this bond forming between their beings, despite everything standing against it due societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone. I can feel you too. She stepped closer, then finally reaching out without gloves on either side to grasp his hand fully in hers. First true skin contact after so many years of isolation caused by fear and misunderstanding rather than genuine compassion or acceptance. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. For a moment, they just stood there holding hands tightly together, as if afraid that letting go would make everything fade back into the shadows where it had been for too long. Then Seraphine lifted her other hand to touch his cheek, gently, her fingers trembling slightly, but still so full of emotion and hope despite uncertainties lingering around potential risks involved moving forward now. Connor closed his eyes briefly, savoring this moment that had never thought possible amidst societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone. When he opened them again, there was a quiet strength in his gaze, a promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together despite everything standing against forming sustainable bonds based off established compatibility rather than just immediate survival needs met momentarily through controlled interactions. Director Krell and security, arrived shortly after with the air of someone who had been summoned to deal with an emergency situation. His eyes narrowed as he saw Connor and Seraphine holding hands across Section 7. Their gazes filled not only with fear, but also something far more profound: hope and trust amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now that this leap had been taken together willingly despite everything standing against forming sustainable bonds. Do societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone? Blake, Krell snapped, his tone sharp as he tried to maintain control over a situation where all normal rules seemed suspended for once amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. What is the meaning of this? Seraphine stood tall beside Connor, her eyes meeting Krell's with an unflinching gaze filled not only fear but also determination despite everything that had kept them apart before tonight. She was no longer weak and vulnerable. There was a new light in her eyes, a sense of purpose and strength born out of the bond they had formed amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. Director, Connor said calmly, his grip on Seraphine's hand tightening slightly as if to reaffirm their connection amidst societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone. She needs me. Krell's expression softened marginally at those words, something he might never have expected given how fiercely protective everyone had been about maintaining strict boundaries. Do societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstanding of potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now? Explain, Krell demanded, though his voice held a note of grudging respect amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved. That moving forward now that this leap had been taken together willingly despite everything standing against forming sustainable bonds. Do societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone? Connor explained carefully but confidently about the gloves and controlled energy transfer methods they used to bridge gaps between their species differences amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. He spoke of Seraphine's need for proper feeding after so long isolated away from everyone else. Do societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone rather than genuine understanding or compassion? Seraphine stood beside him, her voice steady as she added details that helped paint a picture amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. That they had formed not just a temporary alliance, but something deeper, a symbiotic bond capable of sustaining both their energies rather than draining one another destructively like past encounters inevitably had resulted into. Do societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone? Krell listened intently, his expression softening further as the story unfolded amidst uncertainties still lingering around potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. By the end of it, he seemed to understand that there was more at stake here than simply breaking regulations. This was about two souls finding connection, despite everything standing against them. Do societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone? What are your intentions? Krell asked finally, amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now that forming sustainable bonds had been taken together willingly despite everything standing against it, due societal fears perpetuating separation, unnecessarily based off misunderstanding of underlying science or magic behind such phenomena, just yet regarding implications for future interactions. Connor looked at Seraphine, and she mirrored his resolve amidst uncertainty still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. To keep her safe, Connor answered simply but firmly, amongst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now that this leap had been taken together willingly despite everything standing against forming sustainable bonds, due societal fears perpetuating separation, unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone. Krell nodded slowly, a rare smile playing at the corners of his lips. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. He understood better than most how fear and misunderstanding could isolate people, human or alien, even when they deserved more. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now that forming sustainable bonds had been taken together willingly despite everything standing against it, due societal fears perpetuating separation, unnecessarily based off misunderstanding of underlying science or magic behind such phenomena, just yet regarding implications for future interactions. Very well, he said finally. Amidst uncertainty still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. I'm removing myself from this situation and leaving you two under each other's guardianship. Seraphine stood tall beside Connor, her eyes bright with tears despite everything that had kept them apart, before tonight finally no longer alone, due societal fears perpetuating separation, unnecessarily based off misunderstandings rather than genuine understanding or compassion. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. Thank you, she whispered softly. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. It was all that needed to be said. Her gratitude and relief were palpable despite everything standing against forming sustainable bonds, due societal fears perpetuating separation, unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone, rather than genuine acceptance or compassion. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. In the end, Krell's departure marked not just a change in their circumstances, but also an acknowledgement of something greater. The power of human connection and empathy could bridge gaps wider than any walls humanity had ever built, due societal fears perpetuating separation, unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone, rather than genuine understanding or compassion. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. Seraphine's eyes shone as Connor stepped closer, pulling her into a hug that felt like coming home after years of exile and loneliness. Despite everything standing against forming sustainable bonds, due societal fears perpetuating separation, unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone, rather than genuine acceptance or compassion. Amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. It's going to be okay, Connor whispered amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. His voice steady and reassuring despite everything that had kept them apart before tonight. Do societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone rather than genuine understanding or compassion? Amidst uncertainties still lingering around, potential benefits versus risks involved moving forward now. Seraphine cried softly into Connor's shoulder. Her tears were a mix of relief and joy, washing away years of isolation caused by fear and misunderstanding. Despite everything standing against forming sustainable bonds, do societal fears perpetuating separation unnecessarily based off misunderstandings alone rather than genuine acceptance or